one thing I've been seeing a lot with the American politics of today, and one thing that you have noticed as well is just the right wing's response of the COVID-19, and blaming the entirely the healthcare system and the government itself, government regulations, instead of what the actual truth is, and that is free market capitalism that is not regulated and only promotes inequality. And by this, right wingers, they actually took a step further. And now there's people all over the streets in Arizona and Wisconsin um, where right wingers are protesting against social distancing and the stay at home laws, essentially calling it as how they put it again. Hold on, let me see. As a oppression against the working class of America. This is honestly false as entirely because essentially in my argument against this is that capitalism is a system where you yourself have to force yourself to sell your labor to the employer, by which the employer buys your labor entirely, and you actually don't really have a say onto what you produce, because the employer is buying your labor. Whatever you produce goes to the employer, and then he sells what you produced to him, to the consumer. Then he gets the money of what he sold, and then he gives you a surplus of a net value. So that, and but he still has to keep the money that he gained from it, so that way he can keep buying your labor, and that already is capitalism. That is capitalism, and that is employment entirely under capitalism. You actually don't have a say, and you have to sell your labor onto yourself. That's on how the production under capitalism works. That is the mode of production. That is how the means of production is used entirely. You are employed. It is a wage. You are given a wage, and that wage is a surplus by which the employer gets from selling the items. That is on that, and that creates onto capital, wage labor, commodity production, etc. Essentially, the more commodities you produce, the more of the commodity you become. This is capitalism. So you can already explain by this definition entirely, which I would say is the rightful definition of capitalism, and on how employment works, private employment works under capitalism. You can say that this already is the oppression of the labor workers, of the working class. So by this, free market in itself has been oppressing the working class by far further on than any other than not necessarily any other system, but already in itself than just social distancing and staying at home laws. As well, this gets into my next topic, onto my next target against the landlords that rent, essentially that make you pay to live at a certain area, and this is why we need a strike. So, as you are aware of, there has been actual general strikes and rent strikes all throughout the United States. Los Angeles, New York, New Jersey, Florida, even Arizona and Maine. There's been general strikes. There's been strikes against landlords, employers, free market entirely, and hell, there's even been a call out for another Occupy Wall Street, which I am actually all for. I'm actually good for an Occupy Wall Street 2 Electric Boogaloo, which I think would actually help onto the actual working class by far. But one thing for sure, the reason why there has been protests of this, and I'm going to focus on to the rent strike specifically in this video, is that you have to pay a certain amount of money to live at an area, to live at a shelter that should already be given as a need. Shelter entirely, and shelter to be able to have a safe place to sleep, safe place to comfort in, should be a necessity, should be a need. Yet these landlords, and even banks of mortgages and rents, they treat it as it's a commodity. And that is why, there's so much homeless people in all throughout the streets, because most people cannot pay rent. They cannot pay mortgages entirely. So what happens is the banks and landlords, they usually take that away entirely. You have to pay to live in an area that should already be given as a necessity. Not even though it is a necessity, but the thing is, it should be given as a necessity and should already be given as a right, not as a commodity. If you give it as a commodity, that just destroys the entire functions of what a functioning society should become. That's not a functioning society. That is a dysfunctioning society, if anything. You cannot like the thing is the status quo should not be made to the status quo should not be made to essentially oppress the working class. That's not how it should be. That's not how an authority figure should be. Rather, if we are to actually do something about this, we are to create a worker state instead, where these things, food, water, shelter, and basic other necessities, should be given as a right instead, through a worker centralized planned economy that has been proven to be better, by far, than compared to an actual free market economy. And I do have sources of this, link in the description. But yeah. So by this, stop. So two right wingers, please, to Trumpists, to people that watch Fox News, people that are protesting against stay at home laws. Stop protesting at stay-at-home laws. What you're doing is essentially creating more and more of a crisis, by which this COVID-19 virus could infect the entirety of the world, and it's creating more of a systematic structure. It's legitimizing a systematic structure that wants you to protest, so that way they can keep making profits entirely. And that's not, and even though these people don't have your best interests at heart, you are selling your labor to the employer. And while these employers are still telling you to do this, yet you still do as they command, without realizing onto the actual structure you belong in. By this, stop protesting against stay-at-home laws. Rather, protest against the capitalist system, protest against the employers, and protest against the landlords. This shit shouldn't even be happening in the first place. Stop protesting against nurses. Stop protesting against doctors and the healthcare system entirely. Because these guys are trying to help you. They're trying to combat the COVID-19. Yet you still protest against this because, oh, line can't go up. Guess what? Because the line can't go up because of the actual system in itself. These employers, regardless, don't have your best interests at heart. They have their interests first. It's not exactly that they're bad people, but that's just on how the system works. The system is functioned for you to sell your labor. There's a functioning system where someone has to buy a labor. And that is not on how a system should run. By far, not. It's a dysfunctional system and a ineffective system by far. So, by this, stop. Just stop protesting against the stay-at-home laws. Instead, protest against the landlords, protest against the employers, protest against the capitalist system. Because the only way to true economic freedom is through against the status quo that buys your labor and buys your essential identity in the first place. Not legitimizing the people that buy your labor and buy your identity. Fight against the people. Fight, not the people. I'm meaning the few, right? Sorry. But fight against the few with the masses. Organize yourselves. Protest. Strike. Do something against the employers and against the rent strikers. Not legitimize them. You're not going to do anything by that. You're not going to make an actual sustainable society for the United States, for American workers. You're just making it worse. You're making it worse for people to get COVID, by far. You're not doing anything. You're just making noise for attention. And by far, for any actual activist, that's not actually what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to spread a message. So if you guys like this video, then hit the like button down below. This would actually, if you were to actually hit the like button, this would actually get videos up and running and more popular. So that way we can actually spread our message across the entirety of the media. So please hit that like button because that will indeed help us our message entirely. If you're new to my channel, hit the press the subscribe button, red button down below. And if you want, you can hit the bell notification so that way you're notified of my when I upload videos. You don't necessarily have to, but it would be nice if you were. Give me views. Yeah. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and Socialist Links is out.